Assalomu alaykum aziz muxlislarimiz. Zamonaviy ta'lim strategiyalari nomidagi yangi loyihamizning ikkinchi dasturini hozir boshlamoqdamiz. Yurtimizda so'nggi yillarda xorijiy tillarga bo'lgan e'tibor kundan kun oshib bormoqda. Bu albatta imkon qadar g'arbda o'zini kuchini ko'rsatgan va o'sha professional metodologiya hisoblangan yangi metodlarni va yangi ilg'or tendensiyalarni o'sha g'arb kitoblari orqali va universitet kitoblari orqali o'zimizdagi maktablarda va o'zimiz universitetlarga tatbiq qilish hozir kun tartibida turgan masaladir. Shuning uchun bizni ham ushbu jarayonda qo'shadigan hissamiz bor. Bu esa ushbu sohada, ya'ni xorijiy tillarni o'qitish, o'rgatish sohasidagi ilg'or dunyo tanigan, dunyo tan olgan professorlarning kitoblaridan foydalangan holda siz azizlarga ba'zi ma'lumotlarni berish niyatida ushbu yangi dasturimizni boshlayapmiz. Demak, dasturimiz faqat ingliz tilida bo'ladi. Qat'iy nazar qanaqa til o'qitiladi, bu albatta har bir tilga mos tushadigan tendensiya va ma'lumotdir. Xursand bo'lamiz albatta ushbu videoni ko'rganingizdan keyin qanaqadir bir feedback yuborishingiz biz uchun katta bir ilhom bag'ishlaydi bizga. Okay, let's continue in English. So today's chapter is, we will talk about how languages are learned. So it's a very amazing book written by two wonderful professors, Patsy Lightbound and Nina Spada. And I personally met both of them in Bosnia-Herzegovina while I was organizing one of the largest conferences in applied linguistics and second language acquisition. So here you can see in the photo, it's a 15, 8 years back. So she is Nina Spada, and she's an research active professor, and she is now working at University of Toronto in Canada. And Patsy Lightbound, this lady, and once she was a full-time professor at Concordia University, Montreal in Canada. So she is also actively writing publications in second language acquisition. She's one of the well-known professors in applied linguistics as well. So Patsy Lightbound and Nina Spada, both of the very wonderful professors who wrote the book, How Languages Are Learned. Wonderful. So, language learning in early childhood. This is a very important topic because most of us, we were experiencing how our kids were growing up and acquiring a language, either native or a foreign language. So, some of the families could be bilingual in Uzbekistan as well. So, the mother tongue is Uzbek, and the second language, or we can call it bilingual, it may be Russian, or Kazakh, or Karakalpak, for example, a Tajik, etc. So, prenatal studies, language learning starts before the baby is born. That's true because the womb, they may hear the sounds, or they may discriminate the sound from the 16th week. This is very important, yes. And so they may also pick up the rhythm and from the L1, from the mother's voice. That's why it's recommended while pregnant ladies, they should always use very diminutive suffixes, appropriate language, appropriate words for that purpose. And the phonetic discrimination studies, so they can hear subtle phonetic differences very early and lose the ability to hear differences that are not phonemic. And babies in bilingual environments retain the discrimination ability longer period of time. Right. So the child language acquisition, we say that L1 acquisition, or language 1, or native language, mother tongue, acquisition is universal because of the supported theories received worldwide. So when we can say universal theory in the case that most of the case studies are happened in different countries, and so they can reinforce or back up the theory and say that it's a universal theory. So the similarities in L1 acquisition across the world languages, so it means that the period when the crying, pointing, responding are almost the same in all languages, regardless whether it's a Romanian, Bulgarian, Korean or Japanese. And the most people know and have a pretty good grasp of the L1. So which means that before learning L2, you have a linguistic property of your language. So you know what's adjective, what's adverb, what are the articles, pronouns, tenses, gender, etc., etc. Children are able to use more syntactic patterns and grammatical rules of the L1 before they reach the school age. That's true by age of 6. So they're completing the cycle of grammar. So they can differentiate between the pragmatic rules. For example, they know when to say sin or sis. Depends on the social status or depends on the age, which are differing between the kids as well. The milestones of development. So most of the newborn babies, so the period when they are starting to cry, cooing, for example, right? So crying means, so it's also giving a command. So by crying, they want to articulate whether they're hungry or they want to take a rest or they're thirsty, etc. So the bubbling happens around 6 and 8 months after birth. So usually we have a consonant vowel sounds like ba, 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 da, da, da. So usually most of our kids, once they were born, so we had the experience hearing how they are bubbling, right? So using these consonant vowels. And one word utterances. So between 12 to 18 months, right? So gone, dada, teddy, right? So like a gone means it's a whole sentence actually. So someone is gone. Someone is gone out of home. So one word will replace the whole sentence. So the whole sentence actually embedded within the one word. So that's what we say one word utterance. Telegraphic speech, right? So 2 years old. So usually at the age of 2 years old, when the babies are 2 years old, they use this telegraphic speech. So usually it's a simple sentence like mommy play. So which means that mommy, can you play with me right now, please? So you see a very long sentence embedded within the telegraphic speech. And sometimes kids traumatized with any part of the hemisphere, either right or left hemisphere, or experiencing aphasia, so they will also use the telegraphic speech. Because sometimes we can see that in telegraphic speech, most of the linguistic properties are omitted. So there is no proper tense structure, right? So no auxiliary, no adjectives, etc. So just to economize, saving the time, sometimes we are also, while on the social media, we are using telegraphic speech, right? So we are not actually following the word order or the proper grammar rule, even in our native language sometimes, or by sending SMS messages, we are using the telegraphic speech, right? So between the 3.5 to 4 years, filling the missing grammatical elements, asking questions, adapting speech to babies or adults. So even 4 years old children, they may adapt, or they may type of the furnish the linguistic accessoires of a language while addressing either adult or babies, or even asking questions. So asking questions also requires a lot of efforts, because you need to use all these pragmatic accessoires of a language as well. Vocabulary development over extension. So that mostly happens with the either newly acquiring native language speakers or late adult learners acquiring a foreign language. It happens with us as well at the age of 20 or 30 or 40, learning different foreign languages. So we can also have this extended or overextension phenomena in a second language acquisition. So for example, the kids, while learning a language, they may use the word dog, for example, to apply to other animals as well, right? So because of they have 4 legs, that's why they are type of the associating dogs with other animals. So even for the sheep or lion or bear, for example, they may use the word dog, for example. Or the moon, because of the round object. To any round object, they will say, oh, it's a moon. Even though it's not a moon, but that's what we say, it's overextension, right? And also we have another phenomena which is called underextension. So now we can see that the dog, they will only apply to the family dog, right? So only they will use the word dog for the family dog, but for the others they may use another word. Same for the shoes. So the babies will say only shoes to those shoes that they are wearing right now, and the others, they may type of invent something new for other shoes, and we call it underextension. And there is a mismatch as well. So this is the stages of vocabulary acquisition, like overextension, underextension, and the mismatch. There is no apparent basis for the wrong use of a word by the child. For example, a telephone referred to as a tractor, right? So again, by associating an object and by mental concept of image, right? So they may use another word and they may apply the word for the object which actually doesn't stand for the meaning of that word. So we call it mismatch. So index of grammatical development, or mean length of utterance, MLU. This is very important because in the kindergarten and at elementary school, so this is what we say, it's a critical period, hypothesis period, or a very active phase of learning a language. So the question is, what's the parameter or indicator? How we can assess that the child is really learning a language, or how they're advancing in language acquisition, which is a very important question. And sometimes kindergarten staff, those teachers or assistants of teachers, so they may claim that the children actually actively learning a language by showing no proof of that. And that's why usually there is a MLU. So the once child begins to combine words, mean length of utterance is better indication of development than age. So sometimes we may assume that, oh yeah, my child is 4 or 5 years old, so which means that at the age of 5, children usually they are in that stage of acquisition, which sometimes could be wrong, because age is not important, rather MLU, the range of vocabulary is very important for us. So how we should calculate what's MLU, I will show in the next slide. So see, they calculated by dividing the total number of morphemes by the number of utterances, right? So okay, so now we have hi mommy, hi trucks, yeah, hi man, pick that up, it dropped, I running. So now we should calculate how many morphemes we have and how many utterances we have here. So I will give you 10 seconds for you to calculate how many morphemes, how many utterances we have here, and by end, if you are going to divide, then you will have MLU. Okay, 10 seconds for you, please. Think about that. Right, coming back to the slide again. Okay, you see how many morphemes we have? We have 17 morphemes. In a high mummy, we have 2 morphemes. In a high trax, we have 3 morphemes, right? So the last one is indicating category of plural, so which is inflected by category of plural as. Yeah, high man, picked that up, it dropped. So now past tense inflected. Drop is inflected by past tense, so ed, and I running. Now we have a gerund here. So the total number of morphemes 17, right? And total of number utterances, so we have 7, and let's divide 17 by 7, and then we have a 2.43, which means that the MLU indicator is 2.43. That's how usually we should have the MLU. So up to, by the references of the well-known scholars, they say that up to about 4 MLU, this is a good index of development of language acquisition. Beyond that length, the child has more flexibility and the length of sentences is less indicative of what the child is capable of than of what she chooses to say. So which means that usually after every stage of vocabulary acquisition, so every 6 months or 4 months or semester within the kindergarten, so I do recommend to teaching staff of kindergarten really focusing on the MLU, which is very important indicator for language acquisition. In English language as well as in other languages as well, so like Russian or Korean, we have grammatical morphemes, right? So we have a present progressive, like mommy running. We have plural s, like in the 2 books. We have irregular past forms, like baby went, baby is going. It's and the past form is a baby went. Possessive s, like a daddy's hat. Copula, like Annie is happy. Articles, the and a or an. Regular past ed, like she walked. Third person singular simple present, as again, she runs. And auxiliary to be, like he is coming. So these are the grammatical morphemes. And we have hierarchy sometimes, or the stage of learning all these morphemes. So based on the linguistic property, usually the kids are learning from the very easiest up to very complicated linguistic or grammatical morphemes. So that's why, according to research, articles are the most complicated grammatical morpheme to learn for the foreigners, actually. And the most easiest is a present continuous, for example. So based on that, usually we can predict on which stage children may have, or even late adults may have a problem learning a foreign language. So in every linguistic property or in different acquisition process, each one has stages within the stage. So even for the past tense, those verbs describing event or situation or condition, for example. So some of the past tense verbs, learners, foreign learners, may have a problem to learn. So that's why we call it stages within the stages. So which means that even the, like a negation has different variety of stages, which means that usually it's like a U-shaped development. Learners will follow up all the stages to reach the native-like performance or accuracy, we say in that case. So the first stage one, number one, so no alone or first word in utterance. So now you can see that no is alone or no bath. Again, no embedded within the long, so the long sentence actually, by saying no, I will not take a bath, I am very tired, for example. It's a very long sentence. It's embedded within the one word no, right? So after a while, they will move into stage two, which is negative word appears before the verb as utterances become longer. So now you can see the negation no comes before the verb to eat or close, for example. Mommy no eat cookie. Or don't close that. And after that, the stage number three comes. Now we can see that the other forms of negative are added, like a cannot, don't, without, tense, person, agreement. So kids still, they are not focusing on grammatical rules, you see, because usually they are completing the grammar rule by age of 5 and by age of 6, so before going to school actually. That's why mostly I recommend to all my friends to focus on the literacy of the children. So the literacy may be received either in the form of the kindergarten or the private tutor, but still input is very important for the children to be very literate before going to school. So now we can see he don't want that. So so person pronoun like second person singular he, not inflected by the proper negation. So actually he should be like he doesn't want that. And after that comes stage number 4. So the negative element attached to connect form of auxiliary verb like do and be. But difficulty continues with features related to negatives, you see. So again, which means that even asking a question or using the negation, it's a very complicated process going on. That's what we call in a language device within the mind. So, which means that sometimes learning a foreign language may not be very easy, even for the children. So even the children learning their native language, still they are struggling to have a very accurate order or very accurate linguistic property to address and to discuss or to talk with their friends or with the parents or adults surrounding them. So asking questions, adults ask questions about the immediate environment, so usually using these question marks like what and who, and before they ask about more abstract things. But children begin using the question words in an order that reflects that what they asked and their own cognitive development. So that's why usually the scholars, they are recommending to have this interlocutor for the children. So interlocutor could be you yourself, or sometimes we are replacing interlocutor as a TV set, television. So television will be interlocutor for our kids because from early morning up to late evening they are just watching TV, and we know a lot of cases when children are learning, picking up new language from the television, never had any formal setting, classroom tutoring, for example. So that's why cognitive development have a very enormous influence over language acquisition as well. So now you see that even the questions, there are stages that children will follow up while they will reach the native-like accuracy even in the questions. So the stage number 1, formulaic questions or words. So we call them formulaic, means ready-made questions or ready-made sentences. So you are learning them and just using in different contexts, right? So why ready-made sentences are very helpful? Because there's a less stress. So you are not thinking how to build up a new phrase or new questions. So usually most of the foreigners learning a foreign language, they will extend the chunks of phrases and formulaic questions or words. So like a cookie, dedikar, what's that? So usually there's a rising intonation. So I think even in our native language, Uzbek, with the rising intonation, with one word, one utterance, we may actually convey what type of message we are requesting. Now stage 2, declarative word order applies rising intonation, right? So you drink, so usually with the rising intonation, the sentence becomes, from declarative becomes a question now. You drink this? You see? Dog you go bad? Right? So now the intonation makes changes actually the pragmatic meaning of a sentence. And now stage 3, fronting. So they put element at the beginning of a sentence without changing the internal word order. You see, so they will just, even like in the second phrase, like are you are tired. So they are just duplicating the element is or are or why, for example. And they think that actually by duplicating this element, and this element actually inflects the sentence and making it a question. So that's actually how children think about these grammatical elements. Right, now you can see there are stage 4, like a subject auxiliary inversion for yes, no question. Is he going to eat now? So now we can see how subject auxiliary inversion. So does he like spinach? Sorry. So and stage number 5, subject auxiliary inversion in WH questions. Where did he go? Or does the dog have a bone? And stage number 6, embedded questions, negative questions, asking where he's going, why doesn't he play with the other ones. So what I want to highlight here is some of the grammatical elements may take more stages. Like in negation, we witness there are 4 stages, but it may be in some other languages, it may be 5 or 6. But in asking questions, now we have 6 stages. So which means that sometimes they may skip the stage number 2 and go directly into 3 or 4. So it depends again on cognitive abilities, on language acquisition process, and how they have a very reinforced input, or we call it language immersion. So these are the varieties that will change the language aptitude of the children. So we have, let's talk about metalinguistic development. So the ability to treat language as an object, for example, being able to define a word or to say what sound make up a word. So metalinguistic development means that you know something above your daily communication. So a child age of 4 or 5, if you ask what's your name, my name is, for example, Muhammad or Mustafa, for example, or Ahmad. So they may spell the letters, they may talk about consonant, vowels, and etc. So these are the metalinguistic development is also very important for language acquisition. So the children under the age of 5 do not understand that the words are made of separate sounds. Ask them what's the first sound in your name, or if you take the S sound of scream, what's left? So sometimes they are confused, which means that the metalinguistic development also very important for those kids that they will start the elementary school, because at the new subjects and the new stages of the vocabulary acquisition, of course, will create a more complicated process for them if they don't have this knowledge. So even at 4 or 5 years of age, most children confuse the word with the thing in names. So if a child were asked, is car a real word? He will happily concur, perhaps adding, yes, you can drive it. But if asked, is a real word? The child is like to say, no, it's not anything. So again, it shows that the metalinguistic development, also the part of the very important element of the language acquisition. So the learning to read marks a major change in children's ability to treat language as an object separate from the meaning it conveys. So which means that just imitating, or we call it linguistic behavior. So like if you imitate or repeat like an apple, an apple, an apple, a door, a book, for example, of course the children will follow you up. But the case is this metalinguistic development will just accelerate the process of language acquisition, and so the kids will be type of exposed to other properties of a language, what's beyond the language. We call it metalinguistic development. And the child-directed speech. In the past, it has been referred to as a motherless, or later as a caretaker speech, right? So, for example, the characteristic of child-directed speech that have been observed in some communities. So, based on the language aptitude and language development and language acquisition, you may slightly adapt your daily conversation to, we call it caretaker speech. So based on that, you may change the intonation, the words, slower rate of delivery, very slow. Hi, would you like for me to play the guitar? So a slower rate of delivery, higher pitch, right? More varied intonation, shorter, simpler, because kids, their vocabulary range is very limited. So you may not use something from Shakespeare or from Pushkin, for example. Frequent repetition, so like double checking. Will you go for football? Will you go? So frequent repetition. Topics related to the child's experience. So based on the hobby, field of interest. So you should generate a topic that's so they should be accustomed to the conversation that you are going to start. In some societies, they are not actually thinking about the child-directed speech, because it's not considered as a conversation, because kids are not considered as conversation partners in some societies, and their early attempts at language are ignored. So, in some societies, they are focusing on the individualism. So they think that kids should receive the input in an original form, and it will accelerate the process of language acquisition rather than to slow it down. The language development of young children, right? So children at the age of 3, 4, and 5, they already understand what language is for and know a good deal about how their first language works, because of the following criteria. So they have extensive vocabulary, because every day they are connected to the metalinguistic development, and every day they're connected to daily conversation, and plus they have their own interlocutors like iPad, TV sets, mobile phones, etc. Ability to use all basic grammatical structures, so which is also another important factor, and began to learn when, where, and with whom it's appropriate to use certain language forms. Because as adult speakers, we can differentiate or discriminate between the pragmatic accessoires of a language. So when and how to use direct, indirect speech, when to mild the stress, and because, for example, Uzbek language and as other Turkic languages, it's very honorific languages, right? So like Korean and Japanese also, it's a very honorific language. So which means that as a native language speaker of Uzbek, you should purely understand in which context, which words are applicable, or sentences, or even the phrases. So that's how you will type of socialize yourself within the society, or based on your linguistic performance, you can be respected or disrespected within the society. So the language disorders and delays, and most children move through the stages of language development without any difficulty or delay. So again, based on the frequency of language input, they can just accelerate the language aptitude. Some experience difficulties like dyslexia, deafness, articularity problems. So even we can witness that the kids age of 5 or 6, they have all these articulation problems. Sometimes they cannot differentiate between some of the vowels or the consonants, and or replacing the consonant with the vowels, or omitting some of the words, etc. Range for normal is wide. So some kids may not speak before the age of 3. Most children produce a first word around 12 months. Again, the language aptitude may vary. That's why we are, as an applied linguist, we are always focusing why a child, let's say Mustafa, acquiring, let's say, past tense within the 2 months, but let's say Ali is acquiring past tense within the 6 months. What's the difference? Why? What's the problem? So these are the priority tasks for the applied linguist. A child who understands but doesn't speak is probably okay. Yeah, we call it silent period. Sometimes children, even we are as a late adult learners, sometimes we are passively observing language acquisition. So we are actually learning, receiving a lot of input, but still we don't have this self-confidence. So once we think that we have enough self-confidence, then we will start articulating and communicating in a foreign language. Some children learn to read easily as if by magic. Others need instruction that includes systematic attention to sound letter correspondences. So again, based on the cognitive development, based on the input, based on the visual aid, based on how frequently they're using the language. So this aptitude may vary from child to child. So that's why we need to have very good psycholinguists and applied linguist experts, I think, for kindergartens and for elementary school as well. The particular challenges. So some kids experience great challenges in reading and need special help beyond what's offered in regular classroom. So professional assessment is important to identify the problem. So that's also very important, because in a very large classroom, either in kindergarten or elementary school, when you have 40 kids and one only teacher, and you have only 40 minutes in elementary school, or just less time for communication in the kindergarten, sometimes we are underestimating the factor that some of the kids really needs extra help and assistance because of their cognitive abilities sometimes, or because their motivation, or because they don't like you maybe. You know, sometimes it happens that kids, so we call it external factors, like your window blinds, the color of your jacket, for example, or the color of a table, etc. So all environment around the kids may demotivate and slow down the language process. And also some of the kids after school, they have a very active communication with the parents, with the friends, which again boosting the language acquisition. And some of the kids, they're completely isolated. The parents are not very interested to have a communication. They are tired, or they are very addicted to the iPads or the mobile phones, etc. So the kids are completely isolated and they have a less communication. That's why this range of learning vocabulary may be different from one child to another. That's why so every child is a special case, I think, for the teacher. Right. And childhood bilingualism, development of bilingual or second language learning children is of enormous importance. So we are living in a globalized world, and now we are exposed to different languages. So even on the internet or on TV channels, etc. Even when we are going out, when we're walking on a street in Tashkent or Samarkand, for example, so we can be witness that there are many different languages going around us. So either Uzbek, Russian, or Tajik, or English, or Turkish, or Kazakh, etc. So and now we have international marriages as well, right? So a lot of Uzbek girls are marrying foreigners, or foreigners are married to Uzbek boys, etc. So we have these multinational families, and we have in that case there are two phenomena. So the one is a simultaneous bilingualism, children who are exposed to more than one language virtually from birth, and sequential bilingualism, children who are exposed to a second language after they acquire their first language, right? So like I have a lot of families that are bilingual in Russian, Turkish, or English, Uzbek, for example. And sequential bilingualism, for example, most of our local Uzbek families migrating to foreign countries, so, and their kids learning here like 2 or 3 years Uzbek and moving to another country and learning a different foreign languages. So the behavior is perspective, and you know, every decade starting from 1940s, every 10 or 15 years, with the invention of a new language school of thought, the new theories were dominating the language acquisition process, and each time they were clashing with the previous one. So that's why we have still the legacy of the last century perspectives. I mean in terms of the language acquisition phenomena. So the language learning is the result of imitation, practice, feedback on success, and habit formation. So usually, if you those kids watching all day long the TV, or for example, just following what you are saying as a parent, husband and wife, and the kids just observing you, and they're trying to imitate, and the feedback on success. So by age of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, so they will receive that encouragement in terms of the reward. Child is rewarded for correct imitation, stimulus response theory, Stimulus of praise, approval, provokes response, more and better imitation. So again, I mean, sometimes a child age of 3 reciting a poem in Uzbek, for example, from Zamonaviy, or on the eve of New Year or Navruz, for example. So and then receiving this, what we say, reward in terms of you are applauding and saying very nice, very good speech, etc. Feedback and L1 learning. Now on the screen you can see 2 conversations happen with the child and parents, mother and father. So the child says, "Nobody don't like me," and mother says, "No, say nobody likes me." Child says, "Nobody don't like me." So dialogue repeated many times, like 8 times. And finally mother says, "Now listen carefully, nobody likes me." And child says, it seems that he got the point, but still is very consistent. "Oh, nobody don't likes me." So now now we can see that still he's very type of the interested, or he thinks that, yeah, I mean, he receives a proper input, but still he thinks that that the phrase or chunk in his mind, it's also correct. So which means that sometimes such a feedback cannot divert the child from the wrong form. So that's why usually the teachers, it's recommended for the teachers not to give such a feedback. So they need to just give a different sentences and examples of a correct form and using the dialect. So, and the kids will just imitate. They will just type of to correct the form in their mind and use the proper one. We have another one, the same, almost a similar dialogue with the feedback and L1 learning. I think all of you guys, you heard about the well-known linguist, the person who is very famous and he's believed as a father of modern linguistics, Noam Chomsky from MIT University, emeritus professor. A couple of times I met him personally in his office in Boston, in the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, MIT. And in 1959, he said, in the early critic of behaviorism, he said, "Input is limited and can be misleading. It contains false starts, incomplete sentences, slips of the tongue. So the parental corrections are either non-existent or inconsistent." So that's what he said, the logical problem of language acquisition. And this is the generated a coined idea of Noam Chomsky. So innatism, innate. So he says that the kids are learn with the innate device, LAD, language acquisition device, regardless what's the ethnic group or nationality or language they belong to. So the language acquisition is based on internal language specific cognitive abilities. So you have an input within the mind, and there's a language acquisition device, universal grammar, and then the language acquisition. So to accelerate the LD, you need to have an input. So already you have some structure of grammar, regardless what language you speak. So in native perspective, the basic structure of language is inborn, LAD or UG, universal grammar. That's the Chomsky's coined word. Language acquisition is a triggering of what the child already knows. So which means that the God created us with this small device. Already we have at least like 7, 8 colors, at least some of the linguistic properties, grammar properties. And the language acquisition, the way how we are learning a language, activates our innate mechanism. The fundamental structural properties of all human languages are hardwired into the infant brain and emerge through maturation. So he says that the newly born babies, already they are embedded with this innate device. What needs to be learned? Properties peculiar to individual languages like vocabulary, inflectional ending, so like these grammatical morphemes, we call it inflectional endings, vocabulary, because, you know, I mean, based on our cultural background, we can have variety of vocabulary, right? So Chomsky sees these are the relatively minor aspects of a language. SPH, critical period hypothesis, there is a specific and limited time period when languages can be learned by the language acquisition device. So usually most of the scholars, they say that to have a very pure native accuracy, there is a critical period hypothesis. So critical period from, let's say, from age 3 up to age 10 or 11, when your brain becomes as a sponge and receive most of the properly articulated words and phrases and sentences. So this critical period is very important to learn a language, even for the native speakers. They say that, for example, if you isolate the children, for example, if you lost them in a forest for many years, once they will have no any language communication. So by end of this critical period, they may not actually communicate in that language, or they may not receive a proper input. So that's what we say critical period hypothesis, which means that even learning the second language as early as possible, it's always very good. Interactionist perspective differs from innatist view based on the following elements. Emphasis on development, not end state. Hypothesize that language learning is based on the same cognitive process as the learning of any other knowledge or skill. Language develops as a result of the interaction between internal, like general cognitive characteristics of the child, and external environment. So interaction actually reinforces the acquisition and accelerate the process of the cognitive characteristics, because cognitive characteristics like for what purpose we use the cloud, for example, what's the snow, right? So what's the engine, what's the bread, and all these things, it's the kids are learning by interaction with the surrounding environment, which is also the part of the language acquisition. So there are two views. Vygotsky, a very well-known Soviet psychologist, and we have a Piaget, also a well-known person, mostly cited in language acquisition. So Piaget says language development has close ties to the child cognitive development acquired through interaction with the world. As a child comes to understand the world, the language follows, right? So that, which means that the teaching methodology and how to work with the children, it's very important, actually, the factor. And it should be one of the main element while we are making a curriculum for the kindergarten or for the elementary school. And the Vygotsky says language development is tied to social interaction. Language is acquired through dialogue. So, and that's true, for example, because it's like you are combining theory with the practice, and the practice, it's a social interaction, because the way how you should behave with the parents, and the parents with the grandparents, and how you should behave at school, formally, informally at house with your brothers, for example, and how you should behave, for example, with your neighbors. So all these linguistic accessoires or pragmatic accessoires, it's a social interaction. When you should slow down your pitch, rising intonation, and all these linguistic, how to make a request, for example, how to make a proper request, how to ask a question properly. So these are the social interaction, and also for the bilingual kids also the social interaction is very important. Connectionism, usage-based perspective, language acquisition is a result of exposure to input. So all we are receiving to our eardrums, it's input. All we are watching and hearing, it's input. Input frequency is a powerful predictor of what will be learned. So the frequency. So that's why we should always take care of the frequency, how our kids are progressing within the school or within the kindergarten. So whatever happened within the months. So sometimes, as we say in Russian, la galочки. So some of the events or some of the competitions, like you organize a competition, there's a reward. And the kids will be very interested to get the reward, stimuli response. So it's better to organize such competitions frequently. So always they should be interested for the reward, to take the reward, so they will struggle a lot to take the reward. Language acquisition is based on the same cognitive mechanism that allows the child to learn many other things. So we have this cognitive mechanism, right? And for example, how to drive, right? Or how to jump, how to fly. So these are the all cognitive mechanisms. So language acquisition is part of this cognitive mechanism. What to learn first, noun or verb? Verb or gerund? So interaction again, or frequently received input makes all this cognitive mechanism work properly. There is no dedicated language acquisition device. So that's what the connectionism view, which is against innate theory proposed, or UG, we say it, universal grammar, proposed by Chomsky. Child's language behavior looks rule governed, but it mainly reflects the ability to learn language in chunks and formulas and to combine those appropriately. So previously I said that the chunks, it's a ready-made sentences or words. So psychologically you will be well prepared to any context, because you will just apply that formula in different contexts. Even we are as a late adult learners, we are always in a foreign language, we call it survival language. So some of the people, they have survival English. So they have like a, how are you? Good. And you? Thank you. How much? So these are the chunks. In acquiring language, the child's brain makes connections between things that go together, whether those things are language form and meaning or different language forms that go together. So, usually in acquiring this language, child's brain makes connection between things that go together, right? So the form and meaning. So how you will generate the past, present continuous, for example, right? So, and association. So for example, some of the kids usually they are trying to remember the words by associating it with something, like a tree with the bushes, for example, with the colors, etc. So the table with the chairs. So they're associating to remember the words. Right. So I think it's enough for today. And it was a a short review of child language acquisition, and I hope that it was very helpful for you guys, and you got some of the information that you can apply in your teaching materials or in your research, for example. And of course, the very important thing is always to follow up what's written by the well-known scholars, because mostly in local books that we were taught by generations, we have a less case studies. So in order to claim that your theory is universal or your theory is correct, you need to have a case studies. And sometimes most of the scholars, they just cite the literature review of someone else and says that, yeah, this is a universal theory and I do support, and it's appropriate and applicable, and they're using those methodologies within the classroom setting, and sometimes those methods may not be applicable in the local context or in the local setting. Why? Because the parameters are different, because the number of kids within the school, within the classroom, and all other like supplementary aids are missing, etc. So it means that not all methods could be applicable within the classroom. And plus, I do recommend for most of the Uzbek scholars, I mean, to have as much as possible case studies with the language acquisition process within the elementary school, and most of universities, they should focus on the longitudinal methods to have all these universal phenomena, either to say that this theory is universal, or even to claim that no, I'm not agree with the with this theory. So the second program that we started recently now is coming to end, and I was very happy to have this wonderful online classroom with you guys, and I hope that in a very soonest time we will have the third program by language acquisition scholars. Thank you and see you soon.